find these data? Says Barry Samson. So welcome back for another SLAM seminar. We're going to find out something about what happens when you really open the sluices and get data pouring in, as you can with a tool like LectureTools. So Professor Perry Samson from Atmospheric, Oceanic, and Space Sciences will tell us about that.
Thank you, Tim. Having a class is not unlike having a relationship. And this is meant to be a day where I'm coming to you for some sort of group therapy. The relationship's not going so well and I need some help trying to understand what I'm doing wrong or what they're doing wrong. And to give you some background on what we're doing with LectureTools, with the bigger goal being to actually truly ask for your help. We're getting to the point, as I'll describe going through this presentation, that we're going to know almost too much about what students are doing. And we're going to know what they're doing during class. If they came to class, did they answer questions? Did they get the questions right? Did they write notes? What notes did they write? What questions did they answer? What questions did they ask? Did they open the textbook? What pages did they look at? We'll know all that stuff. Now what do we do? And that's sort of the overarching question here today is, imagine we did have all those data. What do we do with them? I'm going to show you some of my first attempts to look at some of these data and my first failures that I'll be presenting here among friends, I hope. So, what can I do to increase student engagement? I'm teaching a large class, and invariably, one of the big issues we have teaching large classes is trying to keep students engaged. That seems to be important. At least it's important to me as an instructor. You kind of want to feel like there's a two-way relationship again, that they are participating as much as I am. And on the other hand, does that really affect learning? There's literature that says yes, but to what degree? And can we show that? My other goal is this semester, the last couple of semesters, has been to try this concept of rethinking the large class. So instead of just holding class in the traditional Angel Hall auditorium, I broadcast my classes live on the internet, and then students can be wherever and still participate live because they can see the broadcast and use LectureTools to answer questions when I ask them to ask questions from where they are into the class. So in many ways, it gives them some of the same opportunities they would have if they were physically sitting in the classroom. I'm thinking this is, there's a part of me that says this is a bad idea because I would like to believe them sitting in the room is a far more immersive and engaging environment than them sitting elsewhere. But I have nothing to base that on. And then lastly, so we have all these data, well, can we use them in some way to look for students in trouble earlier in the semester? Right now, it's like the first exam is the first indicator I have that the student's in trouble. And there must be ways we can identify them earlier in the semester. And we've heard some great talks. Tim gave a fantastic talk about how he knows the students' grades before they even sit down in class. Wouldn't that make life easier? Are there data we can access that would help us find those students? So to think of this through, I've tried to come up with a sort of conceptual model of the learning environment the students have at Michigan here and what it includes. This is, certainly lecture, I'd like to believe, is a big part. What the hell is going on up there? Yeah, squirrels. Yeah, lecture. Within lectures, note taking. There's a student. Students are asking questions and discussing. You might use student response, verbally asking them questions. You might have clickers. You might have LectureTools, something that they are going to respond to. And then outside of class, presumably they have homework, they have labs, and they have presumably a textbook. So this is sort of a broad brush learning environment. Now, the way we assess their understanding or their success in the course is usually going to be some kind of assessment tool. And in that assessment tool, the lecture has sort of gone away at that point. And what they're left with is sort of the bones of the course here, with the notes they took. And attached to that, they have some experience from the homework, maybe from lab, and certainly have access to the textbook. So this is what the student is drawing on outside of class. So one can wonder, where does the learning actually happen? Does it happen in class, or does it happen in preparation for these assessment moments? Does it happen at other times? At any rate, I want to believe that when we're going to go out and do learning analytics, we have to understand where are those learning moments, what are the students physically doing during those moments, and can we measure those things that they're doing over at that time. So, and that's what LectureTools is about. So in LectureTools, they're going to have, yes, they're going to have their notes. They're actually going to have still the lecture slides attached to them. They're going to see the questions. They're going to see the response issues here. And soon they're actually going to have access to the textbook as well through that system. So we're pulling together the things that we think students use. I guess it's like, just for those unfamiliar, when you're using LectureTools, this is what a student sees. They see your slide. On the page, they can take notes that are synchronized to the slides over here. They can ask questions during class. So they pose a question, that goes flying to my teaching assistant who answers the question, and then all the students see the questions, the answers, but you don't see who asked the question. And that simple act has allowed now something like 2/3 of my students are asking questions in class. It's very sobering because I realize now, for how many years I've been teaching here, that like 3 or 4 kids that actually raise questions ever in class. Now, you know, a vast majority are raising questions in class, and how very confusing I've probably been all these years and just didn't know it. The fact that they can ask these questions and safely get answers is valuable. I can ask them questions, and that's probably, I argue, one of the also important parts of this. We have a new version coming out that I won't go through at the moment, but basically you are able to go, and the student's able to take notes, bookmark a page in their textbook, bookmark a slide from class, bookmark something that you've uploaded as an instructor. They'll have access to that here and be able to bookmark that, and then pose questions about it, either to the instructor or to others in class, or a more sort of social network for students to gain information when they want it from whomever they want it. As part of the class experience. So we're trying to think about these new tools. What kinds of tools would the students like to have and be comfortable using, and pedagogically be sound ways for them to learn more. So, and by the way, since you don't have technology in front of you, if you have questions, comments, or just want to sing out, don't be shy, as my students are, all right? Just yell out to your questions here.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, as your teaching assistants are putting in answers to your questions, do those questions and answers get sort of logged, so there's a record of them?
Correct.
And then, I'm sort of curious, the choice to have the GSI respond to the question online, as opposed to you stopping and answering the question. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's a judgment call, and I don't know if you use some of both or how that works.
Yeah, you have the option of doing that yourself. I'm not particularly good at multitasking. Yeah, I can pull up these questions, and we could make it so it dinged every time a question came up, but I could see students immediately having fun with that. So I am getting feedback constantly that I could be looking at. And the way this works is there are 2 screens. Well, let me go there. There are 2 screens the instructor sees. I, as the instructor, upload my slides. And within this screen, you see there are buttons here that I can, I then present class, prepare class, present class, and I'll go to assess in a minute. And in the presentation mode, I can make 2 screens, one that the students see and one that would be on my screen. On my screen, I will see the questions as they're coming in, and I'll see what my GSI is answering, and I can always step in. Likewise, the students, I didn't show that yet, but the students have a button on their screen, which I think is way fun. They have a button here that says I'm confused. I call it the WTF button. You know, they're just lost at that point, and they hit that button, and it marks the slide so later they can go back and, you know, remember where they were confused during class. And at the same time, it sends a signal up to my screen saying how many students are confused at the moment. Now, I may still ignore that, but at least I know when they're confused, and after class, I might go back and review that and say, well, there's a place I might want to revisit.
Do they use it?
Oh, they do use it, yeah. They do. They use it if you use it. If they see, it's a vending machine. If they're going to put their quarter in, they want to make sure they're going to get something out. So I make sure that when I see that, next day I'll talk about, I see some of you are confused on this. And then they understand the value of it. Sure. What you do in that case is a whole other issue. Carl Wyman, a couple weeks ago, said that he's famously in class when he said something and it was obvious then that the students were confused, that he would come back the next time and he would say it louder. Because, we're experts in our field and we think we say things in a way that I understand perfectly. So how could you not understand what I'm saying? That's a whole nother discussion. So you as the instructors, I've said, you upload your slides, you can rearrange your slides, and importantly, you can add questions. What we're trying to do is basically eliminate the clicker by giving a new system that does what clickers do and more. So in this, you ask questions, multiple choice type questions, but you can ask image-based questions. My field being meteorology. By the way, I'm a meteorologist, thank you. Meteorology, then I want to ask questions about weather maps, perhaps. So I put a map on the screen and say, okay, where do you expect the wind speeds to be highest under these conditions? And they can put a dot on the map, and we can then talk about the distribution of dots live in the class. Or free response, that's hugely important. Maybe I ask a multiple choice question and follow it up with, well, justify your answer. And looking at these free response answers, it gives an opportunity to again, give feedback. I like this answer because it includes these points. This answer is weak for the following reasons. I'm giving them information that will be helpful for them as they prepare for the exams. They'll know what I'm looking for. And ordered lists. Again, I teach courses in climate change, and there's some issues in climate change which are not black and white. And here's a list of important things you could do to reduce your energy consumption. What do you think is most important? It leads to a wonderful discussion about what's important. So it provides an opportunity for more kinds of questions than the clickers could do. And you can show results, so here's the results from someone else's class on the future of the sovereign state, and I have no idea what the right answer is, but there's a distribution from students. You can indicate if there is a right answer, which one is right, and keep track of who got it right. Here's an example of students being asked a free response question to name one thing that's similar and dissimilar between tendons and ligaments, and someone in the room could know whether any of these are right or wrong. Again, you can see how the students are now getting an opportunity to participate in class. And part of this was all part of our research on what is going to happen, not what could, but what is going to happen when all students start showing up in class with some kind of internet-enabled device. And you can ban them, but that's silly, because they're going to find a way to use them anyway. You can ignore them, which is even stupider. I invite you to only go sit in the back of any large classroom at this university where instructors ignored the laptop to see why. But if you physically or actively take over the laptop and have them do stuff on the laptop, take notes, answer questions, and participate, you have engaged that machine in a way that is useful for your class. And I argue that there's value in thinking about doing that. Here's an image-based kind of question. This is Hurricane Katrina. Where would you expect the greatest storm surge? And to understand, you'd have to understand the circulation around a hurricane, and what the ocean is doing, etc., and why NOAA then made a big push to get people out of the way here in Mobile, Alabama, and totally ignored New Orleans because we forgot about the fact that air was going to flow into Lake Pontchartrain and flow back from the north into New Orleans from the backside. So that was leads again to a discussion about what you couldn't do that with clickers or other mechanisms. And here's, you're presenting a slide, the students are confused, and you get to know that students are confused, and as am I.
Is that their left side that's confused? It says 50%.
Yeah, 50% are confused, that's right. We don't know which one. But these are all data being collected. So we know when you're confused. We know what questions you're asking. We know how you're answering questions. all these data are stored. We have a text working with Brenda Gunderson, and she uses this textbook in her class, this Mind on Statistics. And we made a system for her so that the students get the book online, but she is able to offer homework online. And she offers her homework on the right here. Students do their homework online. The students do their homework online, and then the GSIs can grade that homework. She has 1,500 students per semester in that course. So the students have to, GSIs grade that homework and can provide feedback to the students individualized, and do it fairly quickly, and the grades are automatically stored that way. So you're just looking at these new systems that are coming up, and we have all the data on when they did the homework, what time of day they did the homework. We know how they answer the homework. All this is being stored also. We got data coming out the wazoo here. This is an interesting fact that I just saw yesterday from some students here in SI who are doing a study on the use of this book in Brenda's course. And they ask about the use of the textbook. This was stunning to me. If you look at that long enough, you appreciate what the students are. 93% of students says, well, you can get by without a textbook. They really don't need a textbook. So, the world is changing, and it's not as obvious to us anymore. The textbook is as integral a part of the student learning experience as we might have believed. So that's a whole nother data set that's worth considering down the road. So, and this is just an example of the homework in class. What we did learn through this process is that this e-textbook concept, nobody is really clamoring for the e-textbook, let's be blunt. 80% of students prefer to read on paper than not on e-book format. And we see that consistently. But in this course, when we connected the homework with the capacity to take you to the page in the book where you could, which was relevant to the homework, and you can open the book and then have the homework open at the same time. In her course, the jump from usually it's 5 to 10% who will voluntarily buy an e-textbook. In her course, it's near 60% who are buying the e-textbook because now they see value. Now the e-textbook makes more sense to them. They can search the e-textbook. They can go and help themselves with homework. They can study before the exam by doing practice sets in her homework system. All this leads us to the point then, well, we have all these data, and what matters? We have gigabytes of data. This is an example from LectureTools where, for every class day, we know who attended class, we know who answered activities, we knew who got the activities right, we know who asked the questions, we know all this stuff, and we have it available. You can export it as a file for Excel. What do you do with that? And so I've gone out in a sort of an experimental way and just started looking at some from my course to see what I could learn. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's still a work of art. The goals I have today in this are to engage you in some thinking about what do we do? Whether it's C tools or lecture tools or whatever tools comes along next. We're collecting these data, and the questions are, what are the important measures for measuring engagement, learning, and such? Again, Carl Wyman suggested when he visited that we should have a pop-up that happens randomly and periodically at various students' desktops, and you have to click the button to show that you're actually noticing the pop-up on the screen. A whack-a-mole model for learning. That's to understand engagement. I argue, I don't know, I'd say stick to physics, Carl. Because that just sounds like a crazy idea. But there must be ways. We can keep track of whether they're online. We know whether we call on blur, are they physically on the page? But they could be just reflecting on what's going on in class as well, and they might not be actively taking notes. Is the number of notes they take really a measure of engagement? Or is that just, nervousness? And okay, so we collect all these things, then who is the audience? So the students obviously would be one. What should we give back to the students? Should we send them after each lecture? Here's what you did today in lecture. And here's what the other students did today in lecture. Is that useful? Should they have just a site, should it be a push or pull model? We send you emails with this information, or is this place you go to see this information if you want to? Should the students be able to opt out of that? Students may get a little creeped out by when they come up to me and say, oh, Perry, I am trying so hard in your course. I go, well, actually, no. You know, I see you only looked at 2 pages of the book this past week, and that was at 2 in the morning. That's creepy. On the other hand, should I know that? To what degree is that information of use to me? And when that happens, what guidance do I give? This is the thing that Tim's working on is, okay, we know these things. We know that things aren't going well for you. What advice do I give? That's a huge question. What should the instructor know so that we can give that advice to the students? Should the advisors know this? At least twice a semester I get notes from this athletic department saying, you know, the following 10 students are athletes in your course. How are they doing? And I have to go, and they want to know, are they coming to class often? Now with LectureTools, I just go in and say, you know, yes, no, and you know, they came 8 out of 11, they came 3 out of 11. I can say with some certainty they came or didn't come to class. So why am I the middleman? They should have access themselves into the system and be able to see these things so that they can talk with their own students. And the administration, exclamation point. So, and we've been talking so far about the students, but let's be blunt. I know how you're teaching now. That should creep you out. I mean, we know, so you uploaded 70 slides for a 40-minute presentation. You didn't ask any questions of the students. Is that good teaching? I don't know, but at what point would the administration want to see these data as well and say, well, we'd like to get some sense of how teaching is happening at the University of Michigan. Let's go in and do some sampling. Or your dean says, I want to know what you're doing in class. Should they have access to this kind of thing? It does raise some questions that we will need to address sooner or later. And okay, so we have these data, then how do we present them? Graphs, data, some tailored ways so that you're not dissimilar from others in your class. These are all the kinds of questions we're desperately trying to find answers to. So here are some data from my own class, just to show you, to give you a sense for the morass I've fallen into trying to look at these data. And I desperately need a system that automates this because everything I've done here has been done in Excel. And as anyone who's worked with data knows, these data are dirty. I mean, you have to pull out the students who've fallen through cracks, who've got a zero, missed something altogether. It just becomes very messy to have to go through and do this analysis. So all this needs to be thought of when we make the parameters for designing such a system. I did this because I thought this would so nicely fall into a line based on the work we'd seen earlier here about, well, if we knew their GPA, that's going to be a good indicator of how they're doing in the class. Well, here is their self-reported GPA versus their score on the first exam. And I note in red those that are going past fail because I thought maybe they wouldn't really care or try as hard. If you're an optimist, you can see a line there, a correlation running upwards on that graph. But if you're a pessimist, you can make the line go almost anywhere on that graph. So it's not clear to me that in my course, maybe my course isn't hard enough, but my course, I don't see this kind of relationship between the GPA and the grades they're getting in class. Yeah.
Have you ever looked at GPA from the registrar? In looking at lots of student surveys, students aren't exactly the greatest at reporting.
Yeah. That's the obvious. Yeah. So I've not done that. I want to learn how to get access to those data, but for odd reasons I can't at the moment. But I will get those data, and then I can look at this that way.
What we see is that they overestimate a little, but they're mostly pretty honest. I was surprised by honestly.
that might clean things up.
Yeah, but and you know, look, there's a correlation there.
Good. Yeah, it's significant too, isn't it? Let's just draw a line, right? All right. So one thing is this was the correlation between the first hourly exam and their second hourly exam. So, you know, there is some consistency at least. Those who did well do well, and those who didn't do well can do all kinds of things. And there are kind of two groups here I'm looking at. One, those down here that I would worry about who did, you know, who did modestly okay on the first exam and then dropped on the second exam. And then these over here, let's call them the cheaters. Why does that come in? Why am I suspicious like that? So, I mean, here's a student who got an 18 on the first exam. Let's review. My exam is 60% multiple choice with 4 possible answers. Now, if you got 0 on 40% and random walk on the multiple choice, you should get an 18. My cat should get an 18 walking on the keyboard. How a student could get an 18 is baffling to me. But voila, they made it all the way up to a 64 or so here, and that makes me suspicious. So, but you know, so our students are doing better. I'm interested in what did they do to improve themselves, and what didn't you do, or to do less well. These are the hard questions. So students know, though. This is the interesting thing. I asked them. This is I borrowed Bill's quiz that he presented here. Survey, and used it on my own class and presented it to them before they got their second exam grades back, and asked them, well, what was your anticipated grade on the second exam having taken it? And you know, they knew, they had a pretty darn good idea of what they expected to get. The kids who thought they'd get 65 to 69 got 65, and the kids who thought they'd get 80 to 84, well, they didn't do quite that well then. But you can see that generally they understand what they're doing, what they're going to get. You know, what did they know? How about their preparation? So before the exam, again using these questions Bill used, before the exam, I felt highly prepared for this exam. And then what they actually earned over here, you can see that those who strongly agreed did the best, yes, and those who disagreed or strongly disagreed did the worst. Again, they know that they didn't prepare or did prepare well for this exam. Does preparation include attending class? Well, I know how many times they attend class, either physically in the room or from away. And sadly, it doesn't seem to be any correlation between them actually coming to class and doing well in the course. And the number of days they attended didn't really correlate with what they consider preparation for the exam. So coming to class is not in their mind preparing for the exam.
But is that in your course where you're broadcasting it?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it doesn't matter.
Well, but come to class includes sitting at home watching it live.
Oh.
Okay? So actually viewing class, they don't consider be preparation for the exam.
Gary, how many students don't come to class? Like, what fraction of students are not showing up? Anyway.
Yeah, this has become an embarrassingly large number this semester. We're on a typical day. I've got 100 students in the course. Today, for example, I think maybe 20 came to class.
In the room.
Physically in the room. Now, how many? But when I asked a question online, I had about 70 who answered. So, you know, many are watching in their pajamas somewhere else. Yeah.
Do you differentiate in your data collection being in class physically versus watching it elsewhere and then looking at how those two groups of students do in terms of performance on the material?
And that's part of a grant proposal project we have going on right now. And yes, we do. We actually record the IP number, where they're at, and we know the IP number range in the classroom, so we can do that. But I don't have answers for you yet.
See, I think, you know, I was in a recent discussion with faculty about this, including some faculty who are co-teaching and they were teaching the first part of the course, students were coming to class with the second lecture, attendance dropped off, and when the first lecture came back, attendance didn't go back up. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to look at how class performance differs, because also whether you've got like an audio or a podcast where you can replay the material, because if you are cognitively attending because you know you can't go back and rewind and replay, there's a depth of processing that's very different from sort of superficially watching a broadcast in your dorm room that you can just replay anytime you're making popcorn.
Yeah, I can see that there are lots of combinations. There are those who come to class and could replay the podcast later. There are those who come to class and don't, and there come those who watch live away, and there are those who don't watch live away but watch the podcast after course. And so we have different populations, and it's going to vary also from lecture to lecture. This is one up, by the way, being very useful for the people who get ill and people, athletes who have to travel, to be able to have this opportunity. But again, how does it affect their learning? We'll figure it out. How does it affect their engagement is another issue. I mean, if I'm sitting at home, I don't know if anybody's done this, where you have one of these streaming video webinars, and I'm sitting at home, the refrigerator's calling my name. I don't, there's pickles to be dealt with there. I don't necessarily focus so well on the screen, so I can't believe students do differently.
It also depends on are you teaching at that point too, because the pickles call a lot louder if the person is droning on it and reading the PowerPoint slides to you, which you are not doing in your class. The quality of teaching has a real strong.
Yeah, exactly. If it's just a stage on the stage thing, I think it would fail miserably, and it's been shown to fail miserably. But if you can use tools like this, where you're actually going to pose a question to them every so often, that is an engaging question, and they have to answer as part of their participation points, then I'm hoping that would keep the engagement higher. But that's only a hypothesis at the moment. So again, in thinking about, they say they're prepared or not for the exam, does preparation include asking questions? How many students ask questions during course? And we don't see any relationship between their self-assessment of their preparation and the fact that they are asking questions during class. So maybe there should, maybe there shouldn't, but we don't see any relationships here. Again, a question from Bill's survey is how much time do you spend studying for the class during, and I can't remember how this relates to what you showed, Bill, but in terms of the outcomes on the second exam, the scores here are the outcomes. If you studied 20 or more hours, you did well. If you studied only 30 minutes, you did well. What does that mean? What kind of guidance do I give to my students in the future? This is going to be a little hard to understand, but here in terms of these are the students who got less than 60 on the first exam. Now what I'm looking at here is how did their scores change from the first to the second exam, and was that influenced at all by them coming to class or participating in class more often? And so negative numbers means that they participated in class less often or more often, and this is a change in score. In general, the scores are higher on the second exam, but I don't, maybe some weird exponential function. I don't see a relationship here that I can actually point at and say that changing their attendance patterns have big influence on their grades. And this is again for the students less than 60%. This is with all students. Not much relationship there between them, whether they come or participate in class or not, and the change in grades, which is making me feel like less important altogether in the classroom. They thought the exam was fairly what they expected. That was good. This is a lot of stuff here, but it simply says, you can't read this, I think. But the questions are, how often do you make outlines while reading? And the possibles are almost always to almost never, from left to right. So, and on the right here is the score on the second exam. So if you said you almost always made outlines, then your average is here 70 something. But I don't see necessarily a trend there about making outlines. I don't see much trend here in terms of whether you use flashcards or not. You get the highest grades if you did or didn't. You highlight the text. On the right is almost, do not highlight your text. That seems to be the message here. Do you study with friends? It didn't matter. This is interesting. Did you create review sheets for your studies? And again, there might be a dichotomy here in the students. Or there are those students in my course who are taking it because it's going to be an easy course for them. They don't really need to study to do well. And that may be this group over here. Whereas there's the rest who are challenged by the course. And for them, the more they prepare, the more review sheets, etc., then maybe the grades get higher. And we see that in a couple other categories as well in a moment. Again, these questions from Bill's survey. So asking, let's go over here. So if you enjoy natural sciences and you strongly agree with that statement, you do better in my course, which makes logical sense, I think, in mine as a science course. If you like the creative arts, it doesn't, I don't know, doesn't really seem to matter. If you, social sciences, didn't really matter. In humanities, if you really like humanities, really hate humanities, you're in trouble. If you're so-so on humanities, what do you do? So what guidance do I give a student? Read, but not too much. I ask these questions in addition of my students, thinking maybe this is an issue. Some students going through some emotional strife during this semester. And in preparation for the second exam, were they going through any particular emotional strife? And does that have an influence on the grades that they're going to perceive? And if they're having emotional issues, there's, maybe you strongly agree with it, you got a lower grade here and somewhat higher perhaps, which kind of makes sense to me. Physical issues, it's all over the place. Didn't seem to be as important. Hard to pull out of this any strong trends. Maybe statistically there's something there, but I don't see it yet.
Barry, how many respondents do you have to this survey?
This was my class, about 77, I think. This gave me hope. We have review questions in the lecture book. The e-textbook comes with a homework system. And in that homework system, the student can go in and do some self-evaluation. They can try questions out. It'll grade you on the fly and tell you you got right or wrong. So you can do some pre-testing before the exams. And what we're seeing here is, again, this sort of bifurcation in the class, where you got one group that almost never used these questions, but they probably didn't need to because they came in the course prepared. But the other students who are more challenged, the more they did these questions, the better they did on the exam. So this gives me hope that practice is going to be a valuable aspect of students could get out of using a system like this, is the capacity to test themselves prior to the test with the kinds of questions and challenges they're going to have on the exam, which again kind of makes sense. And likewise, Brenda Gunderson in her course, and here's an example of when they're grading the exam, here's the question the student has asked, here's the answer the student gave, here's the points that the GSI assigned, and the student will also get feedback on that question, and the GSI can add extra feedback, personalized feedback as well. So the student is able to get this feedback on the homework, and are also able to go and do these questions. There's a set of multiple choice questions they can do just to test their understanding before the exam. And what Brenda has reported last year at the Sloan meeting is that in 2009, her average grade, and it's 1,300 students, was 3.09, and then she added this capacity to do the homework, and the students could self-assess themselves with the homework. only innovation she incorporated that year, and the grades went up like a half a grade mark from a B, or was it B minus to a B. So she's gotten an improvement in her course by using technology to allow the students to do this sort of self-assessment. So here is an evidence that practice, anything we can do to help students with practice, is going to help them prepare for the assessments in the course. This is again another graph coming from the kinds of things that Bill's doing. This is I often feel so unmotivated when I study that I quit before I finish, and this seems to play a role in what the students get on the exams. So those who strongly agree that they just overwhelmed, they don't feel confident, they quit before they finish, they get the lowest grades, and those who push through get the highest grade. So the outcomes from this are both the potential for students to be able to do self-assessment before our assessments, and if we can find ways to increase student motivation. These are two walkaways that I'm seeing in the data early on. So what things should we be measuring then that would tell us those things? How do you measure student motivation?
I had similar data in my survey, and I told a colleague about the data, and he said, well, what you're measuring is student depression and anxiety. And that may be...
Yeah.
That's asking about the motivation and the quitting, right?
Right, but and that's why I asked the question about their base emotional state. They feel, I didn't come out and ask, are you depressed, but what's your emotional state? And I think I don't know how to measure that though, easily or ethically in class.
So is this one more like a self-regulation or failure to self-regulate question rather than motivation?
Self-regulate the question. What do you mean by that?
Self-regulating means that being able to, monitor your attention, making plans. When you are in the lecture, you say, oh, this is something I need to rehearse, to do some problems. Is that something I need to ask? Question, and you kind of allocate your mental resources to, that is something I don't have to do now. I would need to catch up by asking someone, or the ability to do all those kind of planning and executing them is self-regulating. And it seems like this is what is measured here, and that predicts their outcome.
I think this brings up a theme that I've heard in talks here throughout the year, metacognition, that to what degree in our classes should we be spending some time teaching metacognition, teaching about self-regulation and how you plan. Now, for many students in the course, it's going to be, say, I don't need this. But there are going to be those students who do need that. And should they be getting it in the individual courses, or should there be some other resource, or are they getting it now? Are they not getting it now? Or what's going on?
So, on that. So that's why I'm wondering that in the lecture tools, I seem to miss this part that they could say I'm confused. But are there buttons they could say, oh, I wish that we could pause here, so I could think more through it, or things that I want to talk with in a group. Things that they thought they could do, or I need to read more, so that more about. Are they just totally lost, confused, or are they still, knowing how to solve their problem, or where are they? How that would relate to how they use their time after the lecture and how they prepare for the exam. So if there's a way to get a more process data of their cognitive engagement during the lecture.
That raises an excellent question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because so they punch the button and a window could pop up saying, okay, I'm confused, and given an explanation what was confusing. Can they express themselves at this point about what confuses them would be helpful. And if that's useful, we could easily add that. The pushback would be that at some point the measurement process here is going to get in the way of everything else they're doing in class. So if they're sitting there typing that, they're going to miss the next 2 slides. Because if a class of 100 or more students, you're not going to stop class because one student's confused. But there needs to be some way either during or maybe after class. Maybe what could happen is if you click that button after class, it could send you an email saying, all right, answer these questions, or and that goes to your instructor. There must be ways we could think of that would offer the opportunity for the student to express why, help them think through why they're confused. And I think you were next, yeah.
So, speaking about metacognition, we are looking at this at the School of Dentistry with our dental hygiene program. And we have very small ends at this point, but what we find is that the metacognition that we lead them through in their portfolios has the most impact on the middle performing students. So you've got a lot of really interesting bimodal data here with, well, they kind of just know it. And then everybody else who maybe has to work at it. And so it could be really interesting if you can find a way to separate out the students who all they've got to do is sit through a lecture and they understand it and they can take a test and they hang out. To take them out and study everybody else separately. Yeah,
I just started that. I just took the students who got higher than a certain grade in my course and basically threw them away in the data. And now I'll go back and look at what's left and see what's happening there, because I think you're right. That's where we're likely to see. If I'm going to have an impact in class, I'm not going to influence the guys who are getting 90 already. They're going to get 90. But I should be able to influence the ones at the lower end, and that's where I should focus.
And I hope that this will also tell you what you don't need to do. Like, if you wade through all of this incredible amount of data, at some point, it stops being your job to figure out how to get the students to learn. Like, I think there's a line between, I can tell that this student is headed for a screaming failure, and let me micromanage and teach you exactly how you should do this, because at some point that's just their job.
Right.
They've got to learn how to do it.
Right.
We give them more resources for that.
Right.
But hopefully you don't need to do that.
Hopefully, no, I hope not.
Maybe there's 2 or 3 points.
How long do we?
You have 2 minutes according to the clock.
2 minutes, all right.
Only 13% of your battery left.
Me personally or the computer? All right, so here's, just in summary then, I'm seeing motivation in practice as being things where we're seeing a cause and effect. Class attendance, use of the textbook, participation responses, flashcards, note-taking, number of notes they take, there's no correlation. There's all this stuff we know. We have these data. We don't really yet see correlations there. And here is my straw dog. My idea is that we need, as a group, to start thinking about a way to collect these electronic data, such as they are. So, we saw a great presentation about all the things that CTools is doing in collecting information. Third parties, that'd be people like LectureTools, have stuff. M Pathways knows about their GPA and other stuff that we kind of start thinking about creating some kind of database, so that when I present results like this, that you could actually take the same data and play with it yourself. And it's too often in education that we just do anecdotal stuff and show you the things that make sense to us without showing you all the dirty laundry. And I think there needs to be a way for us to have the data here in a way that's, IRB protected and such, but that many could go in and play with these data and start thinking about new tools for analyzing the data, new ways of looking at the data, new surveys we may want to be doing as part of this system. I think it's time for us to add that to our agenda of discussion, is how do we pull that stunt off, because I think there'd be value in doing so. And I think my time is up. Thank you very much.
Already a bunch of questions. More questions?
I just wanted to follow up on the comments about self-regulation. And I think one of the points that the speaker might have been getting at is that a student might be confused. That there maybe could just be one or two other choices, not necessarily to stop your flow or their flow, but you might have an understanding but think that I need a lot more examples, or can you explain this in another way? Because there's confusion, which I think says to you as the instructor, I'm confused, but then there are levels of, I'm sort of getting at, I wouldn't call myself confused. This is a really hard concept. I need more help. But I also get the point that as an instructor and as a student, there's only so much multitasking you can do and still have your main attention and processing focused where they need to be.
Yeah, how the strategies for how to address that are many, and each of them is their own research project. One of the ways I'm trying it is that if a student gets above a certain grade on the first exam in the class, I don't give them the opportunity to take any more exams in my course. You've proven that you know this stuff. You're wasting your time and my time to take more exams. You will now be a mentor to other students in the course, and they could become a resource that can explain in a language that I can't these concepts. So I'm trying to think about, whether that might be a useful way also to pull together, offload my work to others and take advantage of the students who understand the material already. But I'm sure there are many, many other models. Yeah.
In the statistics example, did the student get feedback on their homework instantly, or was it after it had been looked at by a TA? Was it later?
Later, after it's been looked at by the TA. The TA has to grade it, give the number of points. There is a standard answer for each question that all students get, and then GSI can also add more personalized feedback if they choose.
I think it's helpful taking online class to get instant feedback.
Well, there's a self-assessment part. That's multiple choice. That's easily graded. And in that case, it gives you back feedback instantly. Yeah.
A question also related to statistics and the student's choice to look at the e-textbook when they're doing a particular homework problem, and whether you knew where you would be guided as the student would be to sort of that conceptual section on that concept, or would you be guided to an example or the formula? Because I'm thinking, depending on what you're shown by the textbook mechanism, it could sort of reinforce formulaic cookbook kind of learning where students go in and they know how to do certain examples, but they've really been thrown off in a test when the example is different. And I think some learners want to hone in on exactly the cookbook method.
Oh yeah, yeah.
As to how it was designed in the textbook in terms of what it would take a student through, where the student says, "I need help with this problem."
Yeah, it doesn't. It does not. It simply takes you to a place in the book that discusses the concept, as opposed to here's how you walk through the question. Yeah, and as the. It is, but the grades indicate that that's helpful. And maybe there's more helpful ways to do it, but that's, at least we know that's helpful. And we're trying, as we add these new technologies, we hardly ever look at, are they actually doing any good in terms of learning? And here's finally evidence that Brenda's able to show some improvement in her course.
I wonder if it would be the same if she put a page number.
Well, what happens is that the students, if they don't buy the e-textbook, it simply gives you a page number. So then you go to the physical book to that page. So yeah, they get that.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Perry.
Yep.